I drive a 2001 Ford F-150 with a cracked side mirror and a bumper sticker from a fishing tournament nobody remembers. The paint has faded to something between gray and regret, and the passenger seat has a tear in it I've been meaning to fix for 6 years. My neighbors in Sudbury have seen me pull into that driveway 10,000 times, and not one of them would guess that the man behind that wheel owns 14 commercial properties across northern Ontario. That is exactly how I planned it. My name is Walter. I am 63 years old. I drink my coffee black. I wear the same 4 flannel shirts on rotation, and I have not owned a suit since my wife's funeral 11 years ago. I built everything I have with my hands and my patience, and an appetite for risk that most people in my life never knew existed. I started with one small warehouse unit in Sudbury in 1987, rented it out to a parts supplier, used the income to buy a second, then a third. I never borrowed more than I could cover twice over. I never spent money trying to look like I had money. I lived the way my father taught me, quietly, carefully, and always 3 steps ahead. My son Daniel is 34. He works in finance in Toronto. He makes good money, more than I ever earned in a single year at his age, and he has spent every dollar of it building a life that looks impressive from the outside and is hollow as a drum on the inside. Leased BMW, condo with a gym he uses twice a year, wardrobe that costs more than my truck. His wife, Christine, grew up in Oakville, and she has never in her life had to wonder whether something was affordable. She is not a cruel person. I want to be honest about that. But she has a way of looking at things and people through a lens of what they cost and what they signal. When she looks at me, I can see the math she is doing. Old truck, old jacket, small house, retired, and the number she arrives at is not impressive. For the first few years after Daniel married Christine, things were fine. Not warm exactly, but functional. They came to Sudbury for Christmas. I drove down to Toronto a few times a year. We had dinners that were polite and careful and mostly uneventful. Christine would make small comments, sometimes nothing outright rude, just little observations. That I really ought to update the kitchen, that the neighborhood had seen better days, that it was impressive how I managed to stay so content with such a simple life. She said the word simple the way some people say the word quaint. It means well-intentioned, but underneath it means small. Daniel never corrected her. That was the part that wore on me over time. He would sit there and hear his wife describe his father's home and his father's life as a kind of charming poverty project, and he would say nothing. I told myself it was because he was keeping the peace. I told myself a lot of things. About 2 years ago, the comments started shifting. Daniel called me one evening in October, which was unusual. He usually texted. He said he and Christine had been thinking about the future. He said the word thinking with a weight to it, like he had rehearsed this. He said that my house in Sudbury was a significant asset, and that it was sitting underutilized, and that with proper financial management, it could be doing a lot more for the family. I asked him what he meant by the family. He said he meant all of us. I said the house was doing exactly what I needed it to do, which was providing me a place to live. He laughed a little and said, "Sure, of course." That was not what he was suggesting, but it was exactly what he was suggesting. Over the next few months, the conversation kept circling back. Christine got involved more directly. She sent me articles about estate planning and tax efficiency, underlining in a way that was helpful in tone and pointed in intention. She talked about how the market in Sudbury had moved, how the property value had increased considerably, how it would be smart to think about these things while I was still healthy enough to make decisions clearly. That phrase, "while you are still healthy enough to make decisions clearly," I filed that one away. I noticed it. They started bringing up a property in Collingwood. Daniel and Christine had been looking at buying a place there, a second home, somewhere to go on weekends and eventually to retire. The numbers were not working for them, and their mortgage capacity was maxed. What they needed, they explained, with all the language of care and practicality and family togetherness, was some additional equity. My Sudbury house could serve as part of that. If I transferred it into a shared family trust, they could leverage it. I would still live there. Nothing would change day to day. It was just smart structuring. I sat with that proposal for a long time. I asked a few gentle questions. What happened to the trust if they needed liquidity? What happened if they sold Collingwood and needed to unwind things? What were my rights as a resident if ownership changed? Daniel said I was overthinking it, that this was standard stuff. Christine said they were not trying to take anything from me. They were trying to build something together as a family. I said I would think about it. I did not sign anything. The next 6 months were a lesson in how pressure works when it is applied slowly and with love as the wrapping paper. Christine called every couple of weeks with new information, a lawyer she knew who specialized in exactly this kind of thing, a financial planner who had helped her parents, a tax scenario that made the numbers even more compelling. Daniel sent me documents, long ones, with headers and subclauses, and the kind of language that is designed to sound reassuring while transferring power in one direction. I read every word. I have been reading contracts since before Daniel was born. There was a clause buried on page 7 of the third draft that would have given the trust the right to make occupancy decisions with a 60-day notice period. That means they could ask me to leave my own house, the house I built, the house where my wife and I raised our son, the house where I still keep her garden going every summer with 60 days notice, if the trust voted to sell or redevelop. The trust would have had 3 votes. Daniel and Christine would have 2 of them. I did not mention the clause. I said I needed more time. Last March, Daniel and Christine drove up to Sudbury for a weekend. I made dinner, the same pot roast I have been making since Daniel was 12. We sat at the kitchen table and had a decent evening, and then after the dishes were cleared, Christine put a folder on the table. She said they had had the documents revised one more time based on my concerns, and that their lawyer had confirmed everything was airtight and fair. She said she thought it would be really meaningful if we could move forward this weekend, as a family, together. Daniel said he agreed. He said he knew this was a lot of change, but that it was the right move. He said he wanted to make sure I was taken care of as I got older. He said that last part without quite meeting my eyes. I asked Christine what she meant by airtight and fair. She smiled and said it meant everyone was protected. I said I appreciated that and I would take one more look overnight. I went to bed and I read the documents again, every page. The occupancy clause was still there. Different wording, same math. 60 days, trust vote, 2 against 1. In the morning I came downstairs and Daniel was already at the kitchen table with coffee. He asked if I was ready to sign. I said I had a few more questions. His face went through something just briefly, a flicker, and what I saw there was not concern for his father. It was frustration that this was still not done. Christine came down and sat across from me and clasped her hands on the table like she was chairing a meeting. She said, "Walter, I want to be direct with you because I respect you." She said the Collingwood opportunity was not. She said they had been patient and thorough and had addressed every concern I raised, and at some point we all had to make a decision and trust each other. I said calmly that I had made a decision. I would not be signing. The room went very quiet. Daniel set down his mug. He asked why. I said because the document gives you the right to remove me from my home with 60 days' notice, and I am not signing something that does that. Daniel said that clause was standard, that it would never be used, that I was being paranoid, and frankly insulting to their intentions. Christine said she was disappointed. She said she had put a lot of time and effort into this, and she had hoped we could have a real partnership. The word partnership, from the woman who described my home as charming and simple, and who classified my entire way of living as something to be managed. I said I was sorry it was not what they were hoping for. I offered to make more coffee. They left that afternoon. The drive back to Toronto, I imagined, was not quiet. For a few weeks there was a coolness. Not silence, just distance. Shorter texts. Missed calls that were not returned quickly. Daniel and I had a phone call in April that was mostly civil, and I thought maybe we were moving past it. Then came the message that changed the shape of everything. It was a Sunday afternoon in May. I was in the backyard pulling weeds from Margaret's garden, my wife's garden, the one I have kept going since she died, dahlias and black-eyed Susans, and the rose bush she transplanted from her mother's yard in Timmins. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. It said, "Dad, I need you to know we've decided to move forward without your involvement. We've spoken to a financial advisor and a realtor. The Sudbury property is assessed at $480. If you're not willing to be a cooperative part of this family's future, we'll need to have a different kind of conversation about the living situation." I read that text 3 times, standing in Margaret's garden with dirt on my hands. The living situation. I took a breath. I went inside and washed my hands. I sat at the kitchen table and I thought carefully for a long time. Then I picked up my phone, but not to call Daniel. I called my accountant first. His name is Ron, and he has been handling my affairs for 22 years. I told him what had been happening. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Walter, you want me to put together a full picture of everything?" I said, "Yes, all of it. Full documentation, every property, every holding, every trust and numbered company. I want it clean and complete." Ron said he would have it ready by Wednesday. Then I called my lawyer. Her name is Patricia, and she has an office in downtown Sudbury and an expression that has not changed in 30 years. I told her about the documents, the clause, the text message about the living situation. I read the text aloud to her. She said, "I see." She asked if I wanted to make any changes to my estate documents. I said yes. I told her exactly what I wanted. She said she would have the paperwork ready by end of the week. Then I called my daughter. I should tell you about my daughter. Her name is Renee, and she is 30 years old, and she lives in Sault Ste. Marie, where she runs a small landscaping business with her partner. She has never once asked me for money. She has never once made me feel like a line item in a financial plan. She calls every Sunday evening and asks how the garden is doing, because she knows about her mother's garden, because she paid attention. Renee knew more about my financial situation than Daniel did, not because I told her everything, but because she asked about my life instead of my assets. She knew I had properties. She knew I was comfortable. She did not know the full number, but she knew I was not the retired pensioner her brother seemed to believe I was. When I called Renee and told her what had happened, the documents, the clause, the text, she was very still on the phone for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, what do you need from me? Not what are you going to do? Not can you believe them? Not I told you so. Just, what do you need?" I told her I needed her to be the co-executor of a revised estate, and that I would explain the rest in person. She said, "I'll drive down this weekend." The following Wednesday, I met Ron at his office and sat with the full picture for the first time in years spread out across his desk. 14 properties, 7 in Sudbury, 3 in North Bay, 2 in Sault Ste. Marie, 1 in Barrie, 1 commercial unit in Espanola. Combined assessed value just over $11 million. Rental income generating around $680,000 annually. Investments and accounts totaling another $4 million. Ron slid the summary across the desk and said, "Not for the first time, Walter. You are aware that you could drive a nicer truck." I told him the truck was fine. Patricia had the revised estate documents ready Friday morning. I spent 2 hours in her office going through every clause, every provision. Renee was named as sole beneficiary of the primary residence and as co-executor of the estate, alongside Patricia herself. A specific discretionary clause was added regarding any beneficiary who had, in the 12 months preceding my death or incapacitation, taken legal action to compel asset transfer or made documented written threats regarding my occupancy of any property I owned. Patricia read that clause back to me and asked if I was certain. I said I was. I signed everything. Patricia notarized it. I shook her hand and drove home. Renee arrived Saturday morning, and I made breakfast and we sat at the kitchen table, and I told her everything. The properties, the numbers, the history of how I had built it, and why I had never made a performance of it. She sat and listened, and did not interrupt. When I was finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Did you keep Mom's garden going this whole time, and nobody knew you owned half of Northern Ontario?" I said that was more or less accurate. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that filled the kitchen, and then her eyes went wet, and she looked at her coffee cup for a moment. She said, "He really sent you a text about the living situation?" I showed her the text. She said some words that were not appropriate for the kitchen table, and then she apologized. I told her I was not offended. Now, here is where I need to be honest with you, because I want this story to be true from every angle and not just the satisfying one. I did not do what came next out of anger. I am 63 years old, and I have been through enough to know that anger is a poor decision maker. I did what came next because I believed it was necessary, and because I believed my son needed to understand, truly understand, not as a concept, but as a reality, what it means to build something versus what it means to expect something. So I made one more call. I called the property management company that handles the commercial unit in Española. That unit had been leased for years to a small manufacturing supplier. The lease was up for renewal in June. The tenant had been in discussions with Daniel, my son, who works in finance and who I had, years earlier, quietly connected with this tenant as a favor, as a way of giving him experience with commercial leasing. Daniel had been facilitating the renewal negotiations as a professional courtesy, a side arrangement he was proud of, a small piece of the business world he felt he had a stake in. He did not have a stake in it. His name was nowhere on the property. It was mine, held in a numbered company, one of 14. Daniel knew about this property the way someone knows about furniture in a room they pass through. He had a sense of it, a familiarity, but not ownership. He had been telling Christine, apparently I learned this later, that he was managing one of his father's properties. He said it the way people say things when they want to feel substantial. I called the property manager and told him the renewal would be handled directly by me going forward. I told him to inform the tenant that the arrangement with my son was concluded. This was not cruel, it was simply accurate. The lease was mine to renew or not renew, through my numbered company, and Daniel had no legal standing in the matter. The property manager said, "Of course, Mr. Kowalski, whatever you prefer." 3 days later, Daniel called me. His voice had a texture to it I had not heard before, not quite anger, not quite confusion. Something that lives between the two when a person realizes the ground has shifted and they do not yet understand how far. He said, "Dad, I got a call from the Española tenant. They said you've taken over the file." I said that was correct. He asked what that meant. I said it meant the property was mine, the lease was mine, and I would be handling it directly. He was quiet. Then he said, "I thought we had an understanding." I said, "Daniel, you sent me a text message in May about my living situation. I want you to read that text again. I want you to read the words you used, cooperative part of this family's future, different kind of conversation about the living situation, and I want you to tell me what understanding you think we had." More quiet. He said, "Dad, that was not I was frustrated. I should not have written it that way." I said, "Maybe not, but you did write it that way." He asked if I was angry. I told him honestly no. I said I was not angry. I said I was clarifying. I said I wanted him to understand that the property in Española, like the other 13 properties he may or may not have known about, belongs to me. I said I wanted him to understand that my house in Sudbury belongs to me, today and going forward, and that the estate documents I have revised reflect my actual wishes, which have been carefully and legally set down with my lawyer. I told him that Renee was named in those documents, and that he was not in the current version. He went very still on the phone. I could feel the stillness from 600 kilometers away. He asked me if I was serious. I said I was always serious. He asked if I would consider talking about this in person. I said of course. I said I would be home in Sudbury, as I always was, and he was welcome any time. There was another long pause. Then he asked quietly, differently than before he asked if I had always had the other properties. I said yes. He asked why he never knew. I told him the truth. I said, "Daniel, I did not hide it to deceive you. I hid it because I wanted you to build your own life without a safety net that wasn't yours to stand on. I wanted you to work hard because work matters, not because you were waiting for an inheritance. I wanted you to treat people, including me, based on who they are, not what they're worth. And I wanted to know, when the time came, that the people around me were there for me, not for the properties." He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, I'm sorry about the text." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry about a lot of things." I said, "I know that too." We talked for almost an hour after that. It was not easy, and it was not comfortable, and there were moments where his voice cracked, and mine did too, if I'm being honest. He told me that Christine had pushed harder on the Collingwood plan than he had wanted to. He told me he had gone along with it because he wanted to give her what she wanted and because he had convinced himself it was also the right thing for me. I said I understood that, and I also said that going along with something you know is wrong because it is convenient is still a choice. He said he knew. He said he had been thinking about that for a while. Christine called me 2 days later. I will say this for her, she called herself. She did not ask Daniel to make the peace for her. She said she owed me an apology, and that the way she had approached the whole situation had been wrong. She said she had been focused on what she wanted, and had dressed it up as family planning. She used those words exactly, dressed it up, and I thought that was honest, and I respected it. I told her I appreciated the call. I told her I did not hold a grudge. I told her I would be happy to have them both in Sudbury for Christmas if they wanted to come, and that I would make the pot roast. She laughed a little, which surprised me. She said, "We'll be there. I have had some time now to sit with all of it. The garden is finishing up for the season, the dahlias are gone, the rosebush pruned back, the black-eyed Susans just hanging on. I still drive the F-150. I am still wearing the flannel shirts. I am not a man who needs the world to know what I have built, because I built it for reasons that have nothing to do with the world seeing it. But I will tell you this. When Daniel sat across from me at that kitchen table in Sudbury last month, he and Christine drove up, just the two of them, no folder, no documents, no agenda. And when he looked around at the kitchen and the backyard and the old truck in the driveway, he looked at it all differently. Not like a calculation anymore, like a place, like his father's place. He asked me, over dinner, how I had managed to keep it all going all these years without it changing who I was. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about his mother, who never cared about any of it either, who cared about the garden and the Sunday dinners, and the man who came home to her every night in a truck that needed a new bumper sticker. I said, "It was never that hard. You just have to know what you're actually trying to protect." He nodded. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I think I'm starting to understand that. There is a version of this story where I stay angry, where I cut my son out and never look back, where the lesson is hard and clean and final. I have heard that version, and I understand the satisfaction in it, but that was never the story I was living. I am 63 years old, and I have one son, and I built everything I have so that something good could come after me. I needed him to learn what he could not learn any other way. I needed him to feel the ground shift, to understand that nothing he had counted on was guaranteed, to discover that the man he had been condescending to all these years was someone worth knowing. He is learning. They both are. That is worth more to me than any of the 14 properties. I still need to fix that tear in the passenger seat, though. 6 years is long enough.